And welcome back to How to Survive 2025. I'm Brian Keene.
I'm Dacia M. Arnold.
I'm Jim Cobb.
And as we're recording this, guys, it's what Monday, September 30th, and the southern Appalachian region of the United States is just a mess right now. What's this hurricane's name?
Helena.
Helena. That's it. Over 100 people dead, massive devastation in the Appalachian region of North Carolina, with entire towns just washed away. And the one thing people keep hearing as dams fail and floodwaters rise is evacuate, which is what we're going to talk about today, right?
That's the plan.
Yeah.
I'm in a lot of groups online, and this weekend and today I keep hearing, like, how was I supposed to prepare for this? How were we to know? How do you prepare for anything like this? And you don't know, and you don't know what you don't know, and you just do the best that you can in the circumstances that you have.
Well, that's exactly it. I mean, we can talk about preparedness, and we can talk about having a survival food pantry, and we can talk about sources of clean water, having a generator. But there are times and situations and circumstances where you are going to have no choice but to leave all that behind. I live 8 miles downriver from 3 Mile Island. Our younger listeners may not know what 3 Mile Island is. Anybody our age listening immediately feels dread in their stomach. I'm that close to it. And they're talking about reopening it.
Mhm.
So,
I heard that.
yes, I'm a prepper. Yes, if we have a blizzard or a hurricane, we can ride through that pretty well here, or civil unrest. If 3 Mile Island melts down, I'm not sticking around for my food pantry. I'm getting the hell out. I'm going to evacuate. Um, so yeah, let's dive deep into that. Jim, you want to get us started?
Well, my standard advice is always to shelter in place at home until or unless home is no longer safe, or you believe it's going to not be a safe location. The One of the first things you need to do is identify, let's call them red flags, indicators that should tell you, hey, we need to get out of here. Because let's face it, in a major evacuation, the last thing you want is to be caught up in what turn into just slowly moving parking lots
Mhm.
along the interstates. You want
Right.
to get out ahead of the crowd. And you do that by watching for these indicators that, and it's going to be different for everybody. Everybody's situation is unique. So, for example, if there's a hurricane giving your town the stinky eyeball and looking like it's going to make landfall by you, that might be a good time to go visit Aunt Louise in Iowa for a few days. Okay. Or you live in wildfire country and the wildfires are getting closer and closer. Or you live in an area where civil unrest could be an issue and you're hearing about more and more incidents getting closer and closer to home. The idea here is very simple. You want to get out ahead of the crowd, pay attention to what's going on around you, and act quickly. Now, with regards to the southeast portion of the United States right now, that's experiencing an awful lot of badness. A lot of the people there, this wasn't a where they ignored warnings because, well, that that happens just once in a while. This is an event that, for many of these areas, this hasn't happened since Noah was around.
Yep.
These people had no idea that it was going to be as bad as it is. And unfortunately, massive flooding, is one of the worst natural disasters to try to recover from. The cleanup alone is just monumental. There is so much that needs to happen to make those places safe to be in again. And I cannot imagine, I can't fathom the task that's in front of those people trying to recover from this.
Right. And that's an important point. It's not like Asheville, North Carolina, which seems to be the hardest hit so far that we can tell from coverage, because there's still areas they haven't been able to reach. But it's not like those people were given an evacuation warning ahead of
Right,
time.
right.
The tracking models had this storm going in a very different direction.
Mm-hmm.
But the wind field and the rain were wide enough that those mountain regions in North Carolina just got devastated.
Mhm.
So in a case like that, there are no early warning signs of
Right,
when to go
right.
visit your aunt in Idaho.
Yep.
So what are the steps? Obviously, we've talked before about not panicking, about
Mm-hmm.
keeping a cool head when everyone around you is losing theirs. But, you know, I always go back to Dacia, with the 2.3 kids and 2.3 animals, how does a family like Dacia, like, how do they get out of that mess as it's happening?
Well, one of the first things you want to do is you want to identify where you can go. And you do that well in advance. This isn't a drop of the hat situation. You want to have, I recommend at least three distinct, different locations where you could go in the event you need to evacuate your home. Now, the only reason I say three is because we don't know what's going to cause you to evacuate. And if you only have one place, let's say grandpa's cabin, and the disaster is actually occurring between you and
Mhm.
grandpa's cabin, you want to have other options available. Now, one of the things I want to stress to all of our listeners, particularly ones who are new to the prepping world, when we talk about evacuation, the common term is bugging out. We call it bugging out. We are not talking about a red dawn, run off to the forest and live in the woods
Mhm.
approach. As fun as that might sound, it's just not realistic and it's not practical. You look at, again, what's happening in the southeast portion of the United States. The people who evacuated from there, do you think they'd have been better off if they'd have run from home and ran off to the woods?
No,
That's
no, they would have
not
been washed away.
exactly. When we talk about evacuation, we're talking about moving from an area that is potentially dangerous to an area that's less dangerous.
Mhm.
That doesn't mean you're surrounded by nature. For example, Super 8, Motel 6, okay, a
Mhm.
few towns away or a few counties away. If nothing else, think about it like this. Let's say you're in wildfire country and you need to leave. You pack up your family, you head off a few counties away, and you stop at a Super 8 just for the night.
Mhm.
It gives you time to catch your breath. It gives you time to monitor the news, and it gives you time to figure out what your next step is going to be. We're not talking about packing up everything you own into the family truckster and bailing. We're just talking about getting somewhere safe to where you can make an informed decision on what you want to do next. Now, Deja, you have pets. I have pets. Brian has pets. We want to take those pets with us, most likely. It's important to plan ahead that the locations you're choosing, your animals will be welcome and allowed to be there. So make some phone calls, go online, check the motels, the hotels in areas where you're planning to go, and find out which ones will allow you to keep pets with you. If that's not an option, coordinate with friends, family, things like that out in areas a little bit away from you. And, little quid pro quo, quid quo quo, or however it's said. I'm tired. We were camping on
Okay.
the weekend. Um, if, you know, Brian, you and your clan are welcome to come to my house in an emergency and vice
You're
versa.
Yeah, you're my number
Okay.
3 fallback, actually. If I
Nice.
can't make it to the cabin and I can't make it out towards Pittsburgh, Western Pennsylvania, then yeah, you're my third fallback.
Very good. Very
Yep.
good. And Dacia, you're welcome as well.
Thank you.
We have some room, and we love pets, so
Good.
that's not an issue. Um, but with these locations, again, you're not running off to the woods. You're not living off the land. You're in the entirety of recorded American history. There has never yet been a disaster that if you could travel 150
Mhm.
miles, that you could not find food, water, shelter, medical, all of that.
Mhm.
Okay, it's out there. It's might not be around the corner. It might not be over the very next hill, but you're not traveling for months on end to get there. The other part of this equation is once you know where you're going to go, you need to figure out how you're going to get there. What is your method of transportation? What are the routes that you're going to take? Fun fact, counties have emergency plans,
Mhm.
right, for evacuation, things like that. Those are a matter of public record. They're not some well kept hidden secret that only the few chosen can access. You have a right to see them. Find them, look them up. Then you'll know where the crowds are going to be because that's where they're going to be directing traffic. And you can plan your routes accordingly.
I feel like you're talking straight to me, Jim. So we moved to we moved to Pittsburgh from Denver. So Denver is like no water. There's no water. It was illegal for a long time to even like collect rainwater. And then we moved to Pittsburgh, and it's like three rivers, and we have 300 bridges, and there are these dots. They're colored dots, and they're flood routes.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah.
Yep.
I don't know.
Yep.
I haven't looked these up, but I've had like nightmares of driving around Pittsburgh and just like the bottom dropping off these bridges. And I still have yet to know what all these the flood routes are and
Mhm.
where to go. So
Those
I'm
are evacuation routes if
Yep.
there's flooding. But
Yep.
those are the routes, like Jim just said. If you're evacuating too late, that's going to be a parking lot.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. I always, my fallback is look at what happened with Katrina
Mm-hmm.
and look at not just the devastation and all that, but look at what led up to it with the evacuations and how some of them worked and a lot of them didn't. Because number one, they were overwhelmed, the resources were overwhelmed. Number two, a lot of people waited until the very last minute. And you had all of these people that were just at a standstill on every interstate coming out of there and just stuck. There's nowhere to go. You want to avoid being that guy. You want to be the guy who knows the back alleys, knows the farm lanes and all that. And I mean there's atlases you can invest in. There's online research to do with satellite views, things like that. I'm not suggesting you turn this into some type of military campaign, but at the same time, you should know your area fairly well. And if you don't, you need to fix that. You need to know where the different routes are that are going to get you out of town, whether it's the interstate, the highway, or some dirt track that only the good old boys know. Make sure you're one of them.
What if you're in a city? Um, I mean, I guess, it depends on the scenario, but let's say Manhattan is flooding.
Mm-hmm.
Do you recommend trying to leave the city or do you recommend just going higher? Because there's plenty of high ground in Manhattan.
If you can get higher, that would be my recommendation. If you can't get out early, then you might be stuck.
Mm.
And it's better to be stuck where you're at least somewhat comfortable than stuck in a panic, in a crowd. People do stupid things when they get scared. You don't want to be around those people.
Right.
If Manhattan is flooding, you can't get out ahead of that crowd, go higher. Grab every supply you can carry and get higher. And one of the lessons we're learning, and this is a lesson that's been taught over and over and over in these disasters, is the ability to communicate with people is absolutely vital. You need to be able to let people know where you are, what your situation is, and hopefully they can come get you. They can rescue you, or at least give you information that you can act upon to put yourself in a better position. Or, you know, um, ham radio is great. Cell phones are great if you can get a signal. One of the things that we found over and over and over is the towers get overwhelmed, and if they're still functioning, and calls won't go through. Texting will often go through when calls won't. If you're able to glom onto a Wi-Fi signal somewhere, use social media to keep in touch with people. You need to let family and friends and first responders know where you are and what your situation is. And then they can prioritize getting to you, getting supplies to you, things like that.
I have a good friend that is just as old as I am, and has moved around in her life, but didn't know that mile markers are actually mile markers, that the numbers on the side of the road that you see like working up progressively or ascending, like they actually mean something,
Mm-hmm.
and that exits off a highway always correspond with the mile marker number.
Mhm.
Yep.
So
Yep.
if you are leaving or you're going somewhere and you do get stuck and you need to let somebody know where you are, thinking back to the last mile marker you saw or looking forward to the next one, that is like the prime indication to tell, especially emergency responders, where you are.
Yep. 100%.
I'm gonna get
Absolutely.
I'm gonna get us off in the weeds here, but it ties in with what both of you just said. If you're not in the city, if you have access to a vehicle, to a car, and you're
Mm.
using that as your means of evacuation. Um, in many disaster scenarios, the power is going to be out. And if the
Mhm.
power is out, the gas station can't pump fuel. Um, is it recommended to keep, a spare gas can on hand in the shed that you can grab and throw in the trunk of the car as you're evacuating? If so, what are the rules? What type of container? How long does that gas stay good for? And I don't have the answers. I'm looking at you, Jim.
So, number one, as a general rule of thumb, never let your vehicle get below half tank. Anytime you hit that half tank, wheel into a gas station and fill up. I'm going to go out on a limb, and I've done zero research on this, but I'm going to say that the average car, truck, minivan can get about 200 miles on a half tank of gas,
Mm.
give or take.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
my truck.
Just,
Yeah.
just to give you a ballpark to start with. Okay. You want to always have at least a half tank. On top of that, it's not a bad idea to have gasoline staged at home, not strictly for emergency use, but for the lawnmowers, for the weed whackers.
Right.
Most of us have these. Most of us keep gas. I mean, if you have the ability to store gas at home, odds are you have these devices that run on gasoline. If
Right.
you're living in an apartment, you don't have the ability to store gasoline anyway. Okay. So I would recommend keeping at least 5 gallons of gas available at home at all times. That gives you what, three quarter, about a quarter tank of gas, maybe a little more that you can top off your tank.
Mhm.
And it's not an overwhelming amount to keep track of. I know people who keep hundreds of gallons of gasoline, and I don't know if I'm comfortable with that. From a
Yeah,
safety
that
standpoint,
sounds
nothing else.
like your own disaster in the making there.
Exactly. Um, Plus, keep in mind, I know some municipalities have regulations about how much gasoline you can store at home
Mhm.
for those safety reasons. And you want to go into the weeds a little bit, we'll go a little bit further. Let's say, for the sake of argument, little Bobby next door is your average 16-year-old meth head, and he decides he's going to break into your shed to find something that he can take to the pawn shop to steal. While he's in there, because he's not thinking straight, he sees all these gasoline
Oh my
containers,
gosh.
and he decides to light a cigarette,
Mhm.
and the whole place goes up. But he survives. Guess who gets served with the next lawsuit? Okay. You were in violation of your municipality's rules about fuel storage, yada, yada, yada. For right or wrong, I'm not saying that, him suing you should happen. I'm saying
Mhm.
it's going to happen. And whether you prevail or not, now you're looking at mountain of legal bills. Way back in the day, I used to be a private detective, for those of you who are unaware. I did that for a long time. And one of my colleagues used to have a motto that he lived by, particularly when it came to work. Don't risk a lot for a little.
Mhm.
Don't put your family in danger of physical disaster, financial ruin, yada, yada, for the sake of being able to store a little bit extra gasoline. Okay? Climb our way back out of the weeds. At least 5 gallons of gas.
So
Yeah.
also to 5 gallons of gas, if you store 5 gallons of gas and you're not regularly using gas, so you don't mow your yard, you don't have a
Yeah.
weed eater, you're not mixing it with oil and
Mhm.
chainsaw and stuff like that, please remember that there is like user instructions to your gas can.
Mhm.
Gasoline needs to go in a red can
Yes.
only,
Yes.
not blue,
Nope.
not what's the
No,
other
no,
one? What color's the other?
no.
Red only.
Always red, and always in an approved gasoline container,
Yes.
not a bucket that you spray painted red and then wrote in magic marker gas on it.
And
Okay.
not a shopping bag
No.
because COVID was weird.
Yes, it was. Yes, it was. I
But
remember I got into arguments with people online about there were photos of people like taking 5 gallon buckets and filling them with gas,
Mhm.
no lid,
No,
just filling them with gas, and then they're going to take them home. And
slosh.
I'm screaming about how dangerous this is, not just to them, but to everybody around them on the interstate. And people, well, you just got to do what you got to do, to survive.
So keep it in a gas
Yeah.
can.
Yes.
Keep it
Know
in a
how
gas
to use the gas can. Also know that gas wicks moisture from the
can.
air.
Mhm.
You don't want water and
No.
gasoline mixing. So there's like this little button on the back
Mhm.
end of your gas can. You need to make sure that that is closed. When you go to pour it in your tank,
Yeah.
open it up because it's going to keep from your can burping. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Well,
But keep it closed so that your
mhm.
your gas can doesn't wick water into the can while you're not using it.
Right. You also want to add, if it's going to be stored for a while, you want to add a gas stabilizer
I
like
didn't know.
Stable. Okay. There are other products out there. Stable is the one that's very common in my area. Add that to the gas. Um, I've known people who say that you could store gas for 5 or 6 years or more. My experience has been a year and a half. I try to get it rotated out. I don't want to be the test case to decide how long this gas is going to be good for. Um, and I don't have the financial resources to invest in 100 gallons of gas and then sit for 10 years and keep, no.
Yeah.
5 gallons minimum. Use stabilizer to keep it fresh. Make sure it's in a safe, approved container. If you need to beat feet, put it in your tank. If your tank is already full, then put it in your trunk. But it's far safer to transport in your gas tank if there's room to put it in there.
Mm-hmm. It's probably more pleasant to ride,
Yeah.
and if you have a car, to put it in the back, like
Yeah.
empty than full, and it'd be a lot healthier for you and everyone.
Mhm. Yeah, there is that aspect as well, definitely.
That's where I thought you were going with that method. Like, they're gonna have gas. What's gonna happen here?
No, no, no. Like I said, as a private investigator for a number of years, I worked with a lot of attorneys.
Mhm.
They get creative with what they want to sue for and things like that, whether they're right or wrong. It I liken it to, okay, a lot of people complained about the restrictions we had during COVID. We mentioned COVID earlier. A lot of the restrictions, some of them seemed over the top, some of them were outright ridiculous. But we were all subject to them, whether we agreed with them or not. It's
Mhm.
the same with lawsuits, it's the same with rules, regulations, laws, ordinances. Agreement with them is secondary to being required to follow them or suffer the repercussions, whether that's being served with a lawsuit or receiving a ticket, a fine, whatever the case is. The last thing you want to do is have to pay $1,000 fine for something when you could have taken that $1,000 and used it for something much better.
Mm. Mm. That's a thought.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing that this situation right now with the hurricane is reminding me of, especially with people up in North Carolina, Tennessee, that did not see this coming, was the freeze in Texas a few years ago.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people were locked up
Oh
in their
yeah.
homes with really, like, even like Western Texas. There's, if you don't have half tank of gas, you're not making it.
No.
Right.
No.
And so a lot of this is kind of bringing me back to that time where, how did you know? How would we have known that we would be frozen in
Right.
Texas?
Well, and that's what prepping's all about.
It is.
It's being prepared for life's little and not so little curveballs. Okay. Now, here's a fun one that Texas freeze out.
Mhm.
Okay. For any of you out there who could potentially have to deal with something like that, here's a tip: create an indoor microclimate.
Mhm.
If your furnace isn't working, you don't have a wood stove, you don't have a fireplace, you don't have portable heaters, and your family is freezing, create an indoor microclimate. Climb into the smallest room of the house. I don't recommend the bathroom because you're going to be in there a while. Smallest bedroom is usually best. Pile everybody inside, hang blankets over the windows and doors for insulation, and depending on the number of people, the size of the room, and how many four legged critters you manage to cram into there, that room's going to stay at least somewhat bearable just
Mhm.
by body heat alone. Obviously, you want to curl up with one another under blankets, and you know, use that body heat as best you can. If for whatever reason that setup isn't an option, if you have a tent, set it up in your living room. You don't need to stake it down. It's not going to get windy. Set up the tent, put a couple of comforters over the top of it, and everybody climbs inside with pillows and blankets and has a slumber party.
Yeah.
If that's not an option, channel your inner child and build a pillow fort.
Um.
I promise you, I don't care how old your kids get to be, they will always remember the time that you and them slept the night in a pillow fort in the bedroom or the living room. And you, as the parent, are remembering it as being absolutely terrified that the cold was going to snap pipes and everything else, but your kids thought it was the best thing in the world.
And that goes back to one of our earliest episodes of stay calm, stay cool,
Yep,
and be that example for the rest of your family.
exactly.
And so much
Exactly.
of it is staying informed, just staying informed
It
ahead of
is.
time,
Yep.
and it's 2024. Literally everyone in the world, even the indigenous tribes in the Amazon who refuse to be contacted by anybody else, we all have this magical device in our hands or in our pockets that connects us with the rest of the world.
Yep.
Instead of watching, you know, cat videos on TikTok or whoever your private thirst trap is on Instagram. And I'm not judging, we all have our own. But
If there's one thing we don't do on this show, we do not kink shame.
yeah, yeah, we never, never. you know, um, stay informed. And we don't get political on this show either, but I'm of a mind that rather than your cable news channel of choice, use an aggregator once a day, something like Drudge or 1440, the ones that literally just link you to the headlines, so that you can get a clear picture of what's going on in the world. Often, like in the case of the hurricane, let's come back to that because it's happening now. There's all sorts of tracking models. Now, obviously, that didn't help the folks in North Carolina, but they could they could go on and look and say, oh, that's going to be heading north. Maybe I ought to have that in the back of my mind just in case it does change track.
Yep. Yep.
We're heading into the election, survive 2025 indeed. Maybe stay informed a little bit every day, particularly on the local level. Are there protests in your town?
Right.
They're going to be civil unrest. Do you think there's a possibility? Plan ahead for that. And a lot of that will involve evacuation.
Yep.
Now, something we're going to do a full episode on is, riots, mass violence, gunmen, etc. We're going to do a full episode of that. So I don't want to get too deep into it here. But there are situations where you may have to evacuate fast and you may have to evacuate on foot. Let's say, for example, you're at a concert at a stadium and, something happens and you have to get out of there. What are the key steps for getting you and your loved ones out of a situation like that?
Well, for starters, again, the planning happens before the event. Okay. When you go into any business, whether we're talking about a concert venue, a movie theater, a grocery store, a restaurant, whatever, you should identify multiple points of egress.
Yep.
Okay?
My wife makes fun of me for doing that, but I do it everywhere we go.
And it's just particularly today, it is so important to know how you're going to get out of there in an emergency. Now, many venues, many stores, whatever, they have clearly marked fire exits, things like that. Think beyond that. Every restaurant has what? A kitchen. Every kitchen in every restaurant I have ever been in has a back door, an employee entrance, and an area where they receive deliveries. You're going to be one of the only people in that business who doesn't work there who's going to realize that. Most people, if they have to flee, will flee through the same door that they came in. They're gonna immediately go to the front door. Don't be one of those people. You're just going to end up caught up in the crowd. Get to a fire exit, get to a back door, things like that. For a concert venue, think laterally. If everybody is going to be fleeing away from the stage, because that's where the parking lot is, can you go this way? Can you go this way? Can you go that way? And get out and get away from that crush of people. If let's say you're out on the street, you and your family are out shopping, and you turn the corner and there is a massive protest walking in front of you. And for whatever reason, you can't go backwards. Don't try to fight the crowd and try to go opposite them. Go across the crowd. Okay? If they're walking forward, you're trying to go sideways and you're just trying to cut in front of people as you go. Link arms with the people you're with so nobody gets left behind and nobody falls. If they fall, you need to get them up quick because they're going to get trampled because people are stupid. They're not going to look.
Can we also say that not all protests are violent?
Oh, no, not at all. Okay. Not at all. And I'm not suggesting that in the least.
Yeah,
well, I'm reminded
there are ones out there that get bad.
Yeah, I'm reminded of a protest march that I was part of in Baltimore City, and it had the potential to turn that way. Law enforcement turned out in force. The people in the protest were angry. It was simmering, and I was marching with the folks, and I'll never forget this. A young mother and her daughter, little girl, couldn't have been more than 3 or 4, happened to step out of CVS at that moment and got swept up into it. And I had them come march right with me, and I said, "Where are you going?" And they were going like 4 blocks down. I said, all right, stick here with me. And they did. They marched along with us. It was cute. By the 3rd block, the little girl had her fist in the air chanting, "No justice, no peace." But when we got them to her block, I said, okay, there you go. And
get out of here. Yeah.
But yes, if you are in that situation, the best thing to do, you know, whether you are confronted by protesters or law enforcement, is to be respectful, be polite, go along to get along. Whether you agree with it or not, go along to get along until you can get out. You know?
Yep.
There are going to be helpers in any of these situations. There are going to be people who that is their response is to fight, and part of fighting is helping other people and not freezing. But they identify those people, find the people who are yelling out directions, and if you don't know what to do, following directions is probably that one step forward that Jim talks about. Don't stand still, but take one step and one step and one step.
Yep.
All right. One thing we're going to get into in our next episode is the good old fashioned bug out bag. Now that is by popular request. The number one request I've gotten from listeners so far is, can you talk about bug out bags? So I figure in tandem with evacuation, that's a good thing to talk about. But do we have any final thoughts on evacuating itself? Anything we didn't hit or cover?
Again, just kind of to recap, plan ahead, know where you're going to go, know how you're going to get there, and know what would prompt you to leave, and watch for those alert signals, those red flags. And you know, realistically, it's better to evacuate 10 times for nothing than to not evacuate the one time you should. You know, you don't need to, you know, hop in the car and drive 500 miles and then go, oh, it's a nothing burger. Drive 100 miles and see.
Yeah.
Right. And make it an adventure for the kids. Make it fun for the kids, you know, because they're going to respond to what they're seeing from you.
100%.
All right. Well, folks, we appreciate you tuning in once again. As I think we said on the last episode, if we didn't, Daisha has very kindly built a How to Survive 2025 website. In fact, if you just Google How to Survive 2025 podcast, we're the very first thing that pops up. You can watch us on YouTube. You can listen to us wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. And we hope that you're our favorite podcast. Wherever you do listen, if they give you the ability to rate and review, we sure would appreciate 5 stars, you know. But yeah, we will see you next week for bug out bags. We're gonna bug out. That slang used to mean something very different in the 80s.
All right, and one last thing.